Nope, still
posting
posting.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Sweater Knitting Show, episode 3.
The show where we talk about knitting sweaters.
That's right. No sock talk here. I'm your host, Johnny Vasquez.
And I'm Lacey Lene.
And we are the co-creators of the 30-Day Sweater, which is the sponsor of the Sweater Knitting Show. Today, we got some really cool stuff for you. We have a special guest all the way from Massachusetts. Linda Daniels is going to be joining us from Northampton Wools, which is a really cool local yarn store that's participating in the Sweater Challenge. We're going to be chatting with her a little bit about things that you should be thinking about when doing gauge, as well as the sweater that she's going to be designing throughout the challenge herself.
Mm-hmm.
What else are we talking about?
We are talking about gauge and the importance of gauge and swatching.
Okay.
Then we're going to be talking about a big giveaway we're doing, I believe.
Except we didn't have time to get that set up before.
We're going to be doing a big giveaway. We'll talk about that later.
We are going to be doing a giveaway, but we'll have to get that set up. We'll probably send you guys an email later today about it.
Yes.
So we'll tell you what it's all about, and then we'll send you the sign-up info.
Yes.
Later today.
Then we're going to be answering some questions in the chat room and showing off some of your pictures that you've posted on the internet in the last day or so.
Yeah, we've had a ton of response to the 30-Day Sweater Challenge, and we have pictures from Pinterest, Ravelry. We've got a lot of people that have been sending us emails of their work and such, and our resident social media guy, Bobbert, as you guys so affectionately called him yesterday, will be sharing with us all of those cool things. If you are signed into the chat, you're welcome to ask questions. If you'd like, we're not going to be able to follow the questions. There's a lot of people in the chat, so if you're going to call out questions to us, please use Johnny Vasquez before you ask the question. That way it'll highlight my name and I can see it a little bit more easily. And if you're not joining us live, you can always go to 30daysweater.com/show and you'll be able to see all of our past episodes. Now, before we get started, make sure that you let people know that we're live right now. Tell them on Twitter and Facebook. Go to Knitting Paradise, Ravelry, anywhere that you want to let people know that they should come check out the live Sweater Knitting Show. We'd love to have them. And we're going to get into our first segment with our special guest, Linda Daniels. And Linda, are you there? Well, we're not hearing her.
We can see her, but we can't hear her yet.
Yes. Hi, Linda. Nope, we're still not getting. Let's see. What happens? Nope. That wasn't it. This is live recording, folks. This is what happens. Linda, are you muted by any chance?
On your screen?
Nope, we're still not getting anything.
How's that?
Oh,
there we go. All
Yay!
right.
We have Linda.
All right.
And we can hear her, which is good.
There we go.
So, Linda, thank you so much for joining us today. I know that you have to be very busy at your store right now, but we appreciate you taking a little bit of time out to hang with us. Why don't you first tell us a little bit about Northampton Wools and maybe how you guys got started and how you ended up creating the yarn store?
Sure. Northampton Wools opened in 1980 by a woman named Jacqueline Severini, and I started to work for her part-time in 1981. In 1985, she actually sold it to another woman, and I worked for her for about 10 months. And this second woman bought the store because her psychic told her that it was a good idea. 10 months later, I was in a much better position, and I was able to buy it from her. And we've never looked back since then, and that was in 1988. And since then, Northampton Wools has done everything that it was supposed to do for me. It's been the best decision I ever made. I've had an opportunity to work designing and knitting sweaters for movies, Cider House Rules, and for The Perfect Stranger. I've written a book called the Northampton Wools Knitting Book, and I've been published in Interweave Knits, and I do a lot of designing for Frog Tree Yarns now. So we are a full-service operation. We do classes, helps, we repair sweaters, we let people come and sit and knit when they need a place to escape. So it's been a really great experience for all of these 25-plus years.
That's great. I think we actually were in Northampton and wanted to go to your store, but I don't think it was open the time that we were there.
Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah, it was probably a Sunday. We do close on Sundays during the spring and summer. But we're open on Sundays now through February, so any day that you're in Northampton, you can visit us.
Well,
and we have great ice cream.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Northampton's a beautiful little town. A lot of people may be most familiar with Webb's being nearby.
They are.
And but if you're ever going to visit Northampton, you should check out all of the yarn stores in the area. At least from what we saw from the outside, it looked like a beautiful little shop. So.
Yeah, you should definitely. Northampton has become known as a yarn mecca because of Webb's, and we're within walking distance actually. If you want to hike for about a mile, but what's wrong with another room full of yarn, right?
I know, right? Can't go wrong.
So let's talk a little bit about Gage. Since you are a fairly prolific knitter and designer, maybe give us a few little tips and tricks when it comes to making gauge swatches, and maybe why people sort of, just decide not to do it sometimes.
Boy, is that the truth. It's probably the #1 thing I've heard over the 30 years is how do I have to make a gauge, or why do I have to make a gauge? And it's the most basic thing, and it really doesn't take very long. I always use this kind of philosophy. If you were a bricklayer and you were going to build a brick wall, and you wanted to make sure you bought enough bricks, you'd want to know how many 6-inch bricks it took to make a 6-foot wall. Otherwise, you would have too many or too few. And it's the same thing when you're making a swatch and trying to figure out what you're going to do for a sweater. If you don't know how many stitches per inch your knitting and your yarn is going to create, you have no way of knowing how big or how small your sweater will come out to be. And it really doesn't take that long. I understand everybody's enthusiasm. They want to jump right in and get started with the sweater, but it's so disappointing to have to rip it out or come out with something that just doesn't fit. I have a really great example here. I had in my book is a little design for a hat with 2 colors, and I asked several of my employees to make the hat. They used the exact same yarn. They used the exact same number of stitches. They used the exact same pattern, and we got 2 very different sized hats. If you can see it clearly, but this one, the blue one, is a lot bigger than the black and white one. It almost ends up being child versus adult size because of gauge. And this is with the same needle and the same yarn.
It just goes to show
2 different knitters.
2 different people can knit a totally different hat or garment out of the exact same materials as the designers called for, but if you knit at a different tension, then you're going to end up with something completely different.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Lacey and I have worked on a couple of projects where we've had to both knit on the project, and Lacey's a much tighter knitter than I am, so she actually has to use a completely different needle size if I'm knitting on something, or I'll have to go down a needle size to match her gauge so it doesn't look like, oh, I can tell where Johnny started knitting on that sleeve there.
Exactly. And I think that you brought up a good point, Johnny, about needle size, because I think people get very confused and intimidated by doing a swatch, and then what does it tell them, and then how do they solve that problem? Because we're asked that question every single day in all of our classes. If my swatch is too loose, What do I do? And I think if you just sort of always keep this rule in mind, if you want your knitting to be tighter, you need to use a smaller needle. If you want your knitting to be looser, you need to use a larger needle. If you just keep that in mind, then you don't have to worry about the numbers, the math of it. If you're at 4 stitches to an inch and you need 5 stitches to an inch, that means you need your knitting to be tighter. You need more stitches crowded into that space. And so tighter means smaller needle. If you need 4 stitches to an inch and you're getting 5 stitches to an inch, you need a bigger needle to make your knitting looser. You could almost write it down on a card and sort of keep it in your little knitting file so that you will always have the answer to that problem right there in front of you. Because I think that's where people get stuck. How do they fix it? And it's always a simple needle change is usually all you need to do. I think because patterns always have a recommended needle on it, people begin to be intimidated and think that's the needle they're supposed to use to knit it, and that's not the truth at all.
I know that I was one of those knitters. I actually didn't realize you were supposed to check gauge. I thought that when the gauge was written on the pattern, that was just like, well, if you use these needles and this yarn, like, you're going to get this gauge. Cool, that's an interesting fact for me to know. I didn't know that, like, I'm actually supposed to match that gauge, and it may not be with the needle size that they recommend. So that's kind of just a suggestion for you to get started from. And from there, you can check your gauge and see, well, maybe I need to go up a needle size or 2, or maybe I need to go down a needle size. So that that's a really important thing to note as well. Like, the needle size is just a place to get you started.
I almost feel like that's what we should write on patterns now, is instead of, we say use size 5 needle or size needed to get gauge, we should word it differently and say something like, a lot of people will need a size 5 needle, but you should test your gauge and start here.
What size you really need.
Yeah, exactly. And if you knit a lot with a favorite yarn, make a note that, you know, with this yarn I used a size 8 needle and got 5 stitches to an inch. Then the next time you use it, you'll be able to judge and go from there.
You know, this is one of the reasons why I recommend that people invest in something like an interchangeable needle set. So that way it's really easy to move from one size to the other when you're doing something like a gauge swatch, so you don't have to be like, oh, well, I actually don't knit at this gauge using a size US 8 needle, but I don't have a size US 6 needle, so what am I supposed to do now? Use a pencil? Like
Yeah, you're right. The interchangeable needles. I mean, I've been in this business long enough to see this explosion of needles. Back when I first started, we had the arrow needles, and that was it. Now we have so many different kinds of needles and so many interchangeable sets that it's a great place to start. Plus, some people purl a lot looser than they knit, and that's when you get those little ridges in your knitting, especially in stocking net stitch. And with an interchangeable needle, you can have a size 8 on one end and a size 7 on the other, and use the 7 to purl with, and it will compensate for a loose purl stitch as well.
That is a great tip. That I have never thought about that before. Yeah. That is worth, like, you being on the show.
The price of an interchangeable needle.
Yeah. No, that's such a great idea.
Yeah, sometimes it's just that one needle size can smooth your knitting right out, and you don't get that train track look on the wrong side.
Yeah, I have that problem when I try to knit continental style. I have a drastically different tension when I purl continental style, which is one reason why I just avoid it altogether, because it's just...
Yeah.
But if you had, like, 2 sizes smaller on one end,
I'd still probably avoid it, but...
Knitting the round, right?
Yeah.
Yes, knitting in the round. Steeking, here we come.
Yeah, people ask us all the time why we don't do tutorials on New Stitch a Day in continental style, and the truth is, I stink at knitting in continental style, so that's why we don't do them right now.
Yeah.
We don't want you to see that. It's not pretty yet.
Well, those are some great tips about knitting for a gauge and why you should do it. I'm going to give people an opportunity in the chat room to ask questions right now, but in the meantime, while we're waiting for them to ask their questions, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're doing for the 30-Day Sweater Challenge? So if you guys have questions for Linda or about her store or her career, or you want to know, have some more questions about Gage, go ahead and type those in the chat now, and we'll come back to them in just a minute.
Great. I've decided, can I just talk about, you want me to just talk about this?
Go for it.
So I printed out the measuring page and all of that pre-information, and then I also started to print out the day-by-day, calculations and things like that in a little folder, and I put the pages in this neat little folder too, so that I can write on them and make my notes. But I decided to do it out of make my sweater out of one of my favorite yarns, and that's the Marabou from Frog Tree. This is a wool and bamboo blend. It's really, really soft. It's about 80% wool. Let me tell you exactly what it is. Yeah, 70% merino wool and 30% bamboo. And that bamboo is a viscose, which means it's a man-made bamboo fiber. But this yarn has a really great sheen, and I love the way it knits up. I've worked with it a lot. This is a little fingerless mitt that I made out of it, and it's so soft against your skin, you don't have to wear anything underneath it. I'm going to be making a V-neck cardigan. I love cardigans, and they're just right when the temperature goes up and you need to take it off really fast without creating a big mess or having somebody hold your shirt down underneath it or whatever. But we're going to make a cardigan out of that. And with this yarn, I usually am at about 5.5 stitches to an inch on a size 7 needle for me with that particular yarn. And so I did the swatch last night, and we'll start casting on later on tonight when I get home after work and get going on the sweater.
Now, because you've been in the industry for so long and have seen so many different things, I'm going to be a little bit selfish here and ask you, how's your experience been using the 30-Day Sweater framework? Have you had a chance to, look ahead at all? What are your thoughts and feelings on it?
You froze up on me a little bit, so I hope you're getting me. You getting me okay, Steph?
Yes, we are now. We're just a little lag.
I think that the framework is really well planned out, and it will be interesting. I know you've done it once before anyway, and I think that people, if they're intimidated by having to work that hard or do that much, they shouldn't be, because it really does move along pretty quickly, especially from the neck down. We love doing sweaters like that in class because it starts out at the neck, and all of a sudden you're at the underarm before you even know it with the increasing done. And then at that time you've got all these stitches on, and you do feel like it's taking a while to go across the row, but then a little miracle appears and you divide it up, and now you're just on each little sleeve, and the body kind of takes off. I think it's a really fun way to learn to make a sweater and to design a sweater as you go. And the number one thing about doing that is that you get to try it on while it's even still on the needles. It's really easy to make it a fit that will last and that you'll really love. That will be perfect in every way. It's a good job.
Thank you.
Well, that's one of the reasons why we chose the top-down raglan construction, is because you can try it on as you go and make adjustments if necessary throughout the process. If someone's a little bit hesitant as far as whether they think they should invest in the book or the course, what would you tell them?
Absolutely do it, because this is a method that you will use over and over and over again for every single person that you ever want to knit for, because you learn just what it means to construct a sweater. I'm always amazed by the knitters who love to knit, but they don't get how to put it all together, why it all comes together. This way you've got it all, and you will be able to make the smallest to the biggest sweater you can imagine. And you'll understand what it is you're doing. Exactly. You'll be able to fit everybody. And so you won't have that problem of, will this pattern work or won't it? On top of that, besides the fit, you will be able to try all kinds of different things. You'll make your first one in stocking net stitch, which you guys recommend, which I think is great. But then it's so easy to add a cable, add a stitch pattern, decide, yeah, I want it plain to the underarm, and then I'm going to cable the whole living daylights out of the rest. Or I want, I'm tired of ribbing. I want to try a different stitch pattern just on the edges. Or guess what? I've run out of yarn. But it's no big deal because I can now make the cuffs on the sleeves and the bottom edge in a completely different yarn or different color. It works and works and works. It will be it should be the go-to pattern for all of your creative sweater needs from now on.
Well, we couldn't have said it better ourselves. We really appreciate your support and, you know, being part of one of our local yarn store hosts around the country who is doing the 30-day sweater challenge. I know you said that you have a couple people in the store that are doing it along with you.
We do. We do have a couple of people, and I asked a couple of my employees to do it too, so that we will be able to put a couple of different things up and pictures and spread those sweaters in one of our windows later on when they're done.
Oh, cool.
That's great. Well, if people want to find out more about your store and when they're in town, you know, where should they go online?
We do have a website. It's northamptonwools.com. We have a Ravelry group, Northampton Wools, and we do a bunch of emails. I send out an email newsletter, so you can always sign up for that email at the website as well. And we're right in downtown. If you visit the candy store, walk one more block, and you'll be at Northampton Wools.
Candy and yarn. Brilliant.
Yes.
All right, so we do have a couple questions here. First of all, people loved your tip about putting 2 different size needles on the interchangeable needle sets. There's a few people that are like, that's genius, what a great tip. So, yeah, a lot of people are like me, wouldn't have never thought about that. Lorelei wants to know, what happens when you get the horizontal gauge to be accurate for, like, if you're trying to match gauge in a pattern, but your vertical gauge is either way less or way more? How do you deal with that issue when making a gauge swatch?
That is probably the toughest question about gauge out there, or at least the toughest question to answer, because the horizontal gauge is really the essential gauge. You need to know how many stitches per inch you get. And if you fool around with the needle size to get the row gauge right, immediately the horizontal gauge goes off. And I always tell my students, go with the horizontal gauge. Most of the time, you can get away with a few more or a few less rows in your knitting, because most of the knitting in sweaters that we do is by inches, not by rows. Row gauge is really important when you're doing a picture. When you're doing intarsia work and you're working from a chart that has a specific number of rows, then you're probably going to want to fool around a little with the needle and make the row gauge the one that works. When you have to have the row gauge right, and it's going to throw the stitch gauge off, the way you can compensate there is by making a different size on the pattern. You might have to move to the number of stitches for the medium when you were originally going to make the small. So it's a little harder, and there's a lot more to think about, but most of the time you can relax about row gauge and go with inches rather than number of rows. And you should be okay.
Now someone else asked, let's see if I have their name. Enhara says, my gauge swatch was too loose with 8 stitches per inch, but too tight with 7 stitches. So is it better to go to a higher needle size when you really need something like 7.5 to make your gauge? I'm guessing it was too loose with the size 8 needle, but too tight with the size 7 needle.
So you would basically need like a half needle size.
Right, which doesn't exist.
Right.
Exactly. So that's another place where it's tough, where you're kind of on one needle too loose, and on the next needle down you're too tight. I would always suggest then that you go with the looser gauge, because chances are when you actually begin the project you're going to tighten up. Your knitting generally will get tighter rather than looser, especially once you get the weight of the fabric on the needle. So better to have the sweater come out slightly big than it is to have it come out too small.
I completely agree. I had another question and I totally blanked on it.
I don't know what it is.
That's a reason.
You're not a mind reader?
Something. It probably has to do with gauge, I'm guessing. It's gone.
Yeah, no, it's gone.
Yeah.
It's completely gone.
Wow.
I'm sure we'll get it some other time. Well, Linda, I want to thank you so much for joining us for today's episode of the Sweater Knitting Show. Again, you can visit Northampton Wools. Is it northamptonwools.com?
It is.
To check out their website. They've got some great pictures of the store. And if you're ever in town, make sure that you stop by and say hi and be like, hey, I saw you on the Sweater Knitting Show. So.
That would be cool.
Or you could just watch the movie that her sweaters are in and be like, I know the lady that made those. What?
There you go.
Very cool. Well, we're going to move on to our next segment. Thank you again so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Okay, well, that was great. That was some really good.
I love having guests.
Information on tips, especially when there are people who know so much more than we do.
Yeah, it's a really great thing.
I mean, we've done a lot in our few years of knitting, but to have someone who's been doing this for 20 or 30 years and be able to pick their brain is really a treat. So we really appreciate when we can have guests that are so knowledgeable on the show. So we got a couple more things. We're going to be answering questions that you guys may have about your progress in the chat room, so go ahead and be asking those, and we'll get to those in just a minute. I want to let you know about something really big that we're going to start up later today. We are going to be doing a series of really big giveaways throughout this entire challenge. Now, yes?
I love giveaways. Just wanted you to know they're awesome.
Yes.
Continue.
Absolutely. And we have a whole bunch of really generous sponsors that have donated products for us to just give to you guys. And we've made sure that these products are not just like little tiny, throwaway gifts. We've got some really big, awesome prizes that are going to be a part of this giveaway. And I don't want to give away too much information just yet, but there are actually going to be two separate kinds of giveaways. So every week we'll be doing a series of giveaways where you can enter to win one of the prizes that are being given away that week. So there will be 4 or 5 prizes each week that you'll have a chance to win. And we have a special way for you guys to enter into that. We'll send you the link when those are available. But you'll be able to enter, and then you'll be able to earn more entries by telling your friends about the giveaway. So you can share on Twitter or Facebook or email them, and for everybody that signs up, you get even more entries, so more chances to win those prizes. And the prizes are things like interchangeable needle sets, gift cards to for yarn, sweaters worth of yarns, free patterns, and just all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
Awesome stuff from everywhere. I love it. Actually, we've been getting all of the prizes in, and I get to look at them and touch them, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. I hope I can't win this, but someone awesome will win this, and they will love it because it's amazing.
Yeah. So those will begin tomorrow when we have our next special guest, and we'll tell you a little bit about what's coming up tomorrow at the end of the show. But today we are starting a month-long giveaway. Okay, so this will end at the end of the 30-day sweater. So October 31st will be the end of this giveaway, and we almost need a drum roll because it's this exciting. Like, we are giving
I don't know
away.
If you can hear that. I feel like you should hear that. Can you hear that? Oh, well.
We are giving away free yarn for a year.
A year.
Right. So one person is going to win what will be the equivalent of enough yarn to knit for a year, maybe even more.
Depends how fast you knit and how often you knit. But if you've got yarn for a year, you probably knit a lot more. Just saying.
Yes, so it will be a minimum of 52 balls of yarn, and we have some really incredible companies that have donated yarn for this. Companies like Brown Sheep, Malabrigo, Plymouth. We've got some hand dyers that have donated some really cool, luxurious type yarn, and Linda's showing out their hat in the video window. And Buffalo Wool Company has donated yarn. I mean, this is yarn that goes for $40, $60 a ball. So,
and you'll get 52 of them. 52 balls of yarn.
Okay, so to enter that, we don't have that link up yet, but it will probably be 30daysweater.com/yarn, and you'll be able to enter into that as soon as it's up. What we'll do is we're going to email everybody who's signed up for the challenge, and you'll have an opportunity to enter to win the free ball of yarn. And the more you let other people know about the giveaway, the more chances you have to win. So I haven't looked at the chat room yet, but I'm pretty sure they're going nuts.
Yes.
Yeah.
OMG, heaven. I agree. Can I just read some of these?
Yes, go for it.
How they're typed. Free yarn for a year would be heaven. A year? Sweet. It's so cool. Those are some of the things people are saying in the chat room because it is that cool.
Nahara says, wow, and then fainted.
Wow, she even typed that she fainted before she fainted. That's very impressive.
Okay, so let's see. Let's go ahead. Before we get into answering questions, we're going to hand this over to Bobbert, as everybody has affectionately titled him. Because here we call him Bobby.
That's not true. I call him Bobbert, but nobody caught on until apparently the chat room decided to call him Bobbert, and now we call him Bobby.
Because he's my brother, we've always called him Bobby, but now that he is a grown man, he prefers to be referred to as Robert professionally. So a few of you in the chat room have sort of combined the two and made him now Bobbert. So his powers have been combined.
I guess
and he is now the superhero that is known as Bobbert. So let's unmute Bobbert.
Oh, hang on. We get to have a voice now. Yay! It says we muted him.
You should be. Wait, are you?
Hello?
Yes. So,
am I on?
You're on. So Bobbert is going to be showing off some of the work that he's found on the interwebs that you guys have been putting out there. So first, let's get a little progress report on your sweater.
How's your sweater coming along?
On mine?
Yes.
Well, I've finished my swatch, which I still probably need a block, but I'm really loving this buffalo wool. So it's going to be like incredibly soft, and yet it looks as rough and rugged as the wools, natural wools, that I really like to work with. But aside from that, let's have a look at some other things that you guys have been working on. So let me click a few buttons here and start sharing. So here, one of my favorite places to find people's projects in process is from our Instagram. You can notice up in the corner the hashtag 30daysweater. And Jen, I believe, is just finished her swatch and her holding up her yarn here. And I really like the color choice. I mean, of course, dark colors are always cool, especially for guys. We've got a good friend, Heather. She had finished her swatch. And if you guys have been following along, you know that like we have just moved from the swatching. But her name here is UU Yarns, and you can follow her. And then we have Kathy, I believe. She posted a few of her swatches that she had been working on. I like that she really used these little foam puzzle pieces that like you can get for like kids' playrooms to like as like a pin cushion to pin these down. Very creative.
So it looks like she also tested out her raglan increases. She did a couple of different swatches. She's got a photo of her yarn ball band there. I can't tell what it is.
Yeah, it's a little small to read, but
looks like
yeah,
she's done her
she
homework.
really did go all out in making her swatches here. So I think I'm very anxious to see what she finishes putting together. So we have Brandy Wine, and she posted her swatches that she had been working on, and I believe this was in the group in Ravelry.
Okay.
So the 30-day sweater challenge. So and there's quite a few other pictures on there. Too many to show. But if you guys aren't part of that group, I recommend like joining it, checking it out, share your stuff, and look what everybody else is doing. One of the best ways to keep up in this project is to keep sharing where you're at in yours. So,
That's
and then
great.
here
and
on
if you
Twitter,
want to join the 30-day sweater group, you can go to 30daysweater.com/Ravelry, and that will direct you to the Ravelry group page on Ravelry.
right. So we've got a few shares here on Twitter. This is Corin, and she's worked on her little swatch here. I really like the color change of purples in this yarn. I'm not quite sure what yarn she's using though.
Looks like she's holding two pieces together, is what it says.
I believe so, yeah.
Cool.
And that is it for the photos that I have. But again, sorry, let me see if I can switch this back. All right. So, but again, keep sharing your stuff. Keep hashtagging 30-day sweater, and if you guys don't know what that is, that the pound sign or the number sign that you would find on your phones, and then you type 30-day sweater, and you can hashtag us in Facebook, our Facebook page, Twitter, Instagram, and even look for us on Pinterest too. So.
Absolutely. Well, thanks a lot, Robert, and we'll see you tomorrow for some more shares.
All right. See you later.
Okay, so now it's time for us to answer some questions from the audience. We know we get a lot of questions about sweater knitting in general, and we want to make sure that we're helping you out along the way. Remember, to join the challenge, you can make whatever sweater pattern you want. We just can't. We can do our best to help you with those patterns, but since we didn't design them, you know, we're not going to be able to help as much with modifications and things like that for that. And if you're using the book or the course for the 30-day sweater framework, then you're going to want to ask your questions in the forum on the 30-day sweater site. Now, if you have the book, you won't have access to that forum.
But there is a live Q&A tonight?
But we are having a live Q&A tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern. So if you want to join us tonight, we'll be answering all kinds of questions specifically about the 30-day sweater framework from the book or the course. So if you have questions about that here, depending on the question, we may ask you to put that up in the forum. One of the reasons for that is so that other people can benefit from the answer, and one of the other reasons is that sometimes the question will go really deep into the content of the book, and we would rather cover that in the forum. So
And sometimes it involves like math and stuff, and talking about math is good, but actually seeing the math written out is a lot better.
Particularly today, where in the course we'll be casting on, and there's a little bit of math that goes into that sometimes throws people off. So let's get into our questions. I'm going to scroll back here for a minute and see what we can find as far as questions related to sweater knitting.
No questions? You guys are awesome. Way to go. I can't read this fast.
I'm just scanning to see what kind of questions we're getting. A lot of people saying that they enjoyed Linda's segment. She's a great guest. We're glad to have her. Let's see. Where would you suggest getting a pattern if we are doing the paid course? I wanted to design my own top-down raglan, but can't figure out measurements to cast on. We have some resources that give you some basic measurements that you can use as a baseline to start from. So if that's your challenge, we can address that specifically in the forum on the sites. But you can't right now get patterns that work with the course. We will be releasing some. Hopefully, we'll be releasing a couple tonight that you'll be able to use with the framework.
Let's see. You said if they're not doing the paid course.
Oh, if you're not doing the paid course.
I would say check on Ravelry. My favorite.
Yeah, Ravelry is a great place it's the easiest place to find sweater patterns. Another great resource, which you'll also find on Ravelry, is lionbrand.com, who's a big sponsor of our event. They have a huge pattern library on their site. They link a lot of them from Ravelry, so you should be able to find them there as well. But they do some very good, free, basic type sweater patterns that you should be able to use to follow along, no problem.
Also, I believe we're going to have another, like a guest post going up today on Craft Gossip that actually talks about my 10 favorite, like, beginning sweater patterns. So if you're looking for a really simple sweater pattern, that would be an option as well. Let's see.
Let's see. Someone asked about pattern for gauge. Do you use stockinette stitch or the stitch pattern that you choose? That's actually a great question. So I'm going to rephrase it to make a little bit more sense. But when you're doing your gauge swatch, should you be knitting in stockinette for your gauge swatch, or should you be using another stitch pattern? I'm going to answer this two ways. Okay. So most of the time, if your pattern does not specify it, it's going to be stockinette. Okay. But if you're knitting a pattern and it's clearly not made with stockinette, it's made with a different stitch pattern, then you'll either want to use that stitch pattern for your gauge swatch, or you're going to want to knit a section of that pattern and then measure it for gauge. If you are designing a sweater, say like using the 30-day sweater book or course, then you're going to want to swatch using the stitch pattern that you plan on using. So if you're going to be using stockinette, then swatch doing that. If you're going to be using a different stitch pattern, then swatch using that. Now, if you're going to be knitting predominantly in the round using stockinette, then you want to do your gauge swatch in the round as well. And there's two ways to do that. You can do it where you actually knit a small tube. You're just going to need it to be about 9 inches in circumference so that you have a flat section that you can measure that's at least 4 inches. Or you can, there's kind of a trick to knit a gauge swatch in the round flat. Okay, and the way that you do this is you'll knit it on a double-pointed needle, and when you get to the end of the row, it's just going to be like a typewriter. Okay, you're going to take the yarn back to the beginning and then start again. Now, you'll need to be careful when you're doing this. You want to have slack on the back so you're not pulling in your fibers on the back, Okay, so what I usually do is wrap it around my fingers once and then start knitting with it again from the beginning. So you'll knit to the end, then come back to the beginning and knit to the end again. And I also usually add about 2 extra stitches on either side because you're going to end up with a lot of loose stitches on the end. So you want to have the main section of the fabric will be fine, but the sides are going to be really messy with that technique. But it'll be faster than knitting a tube to get gauge to measure in the round.
And also it'll have like strings hanging off the back, like it'll look kind of weird, but there is a video how to do it on New Stitch a Day.
Yes, we do have a video on New Stitch a Day on how to knit a gauge swatch in the round. You can just search for knit a gauge swatch in the round, and they'll tell you how
exactly
to do that.
If that was a little confusing.
Right.
Somebody, Leah says, Knitting Pure and Simple has a whole line of different kinds of top-down sweater patterns. If you'd like to go check them out.
Yeah, and you don't have to knit a top-down sweater pattern for the challenge. Just to make, some people think like, oh, well, you can only take the challenge if you're knitting a raglan sweater or a top-down sweater. That's not the case. The only time you need to use that framework is if you are using the 30-day sweater book or course and plan on submitting your pattern for the design competition at the end. That's because if you design it using our materials, that way we can incorporate it into our system later on for the winners who get their patterns featured in our next book.
Let's see. Smoothie Queen says, oh, the website that I was talking about earlier that's going to have the post with the 10 of my favorite simple sweater patterns is craftgossip.com. It's in their knitting section. I believe the post is supposed to go up today. So it'll have like pictures of my top 10. I actually found them all on Ravelry, but there are some that I have knit and some that I just think would be really great for people who don't want as complicated of sweaters but still want them to look really great. So.
Absolutely. Okay, well, let's see. Do we have any other questions for right now?
I don't think so.
Would worsted weight acrylic be good for a like a cardigan that you steek down the front? It's probably not my first choice for it, but it's not the worst choice for a pattern. I mean, it's not bad. You're just going to want to reinforce the steek before you make your cut. And there's a couple ways you can do that. You can either do that with a machine, using a sewing machine to kind of sew into the steek, or you can use a crocheted steek, and that will give you the reinforcement that you'll need. The fabric's still not going to want to unravel horizontally. That's not how knitted fabric behaves. But adding that reinforcement is just going to give you that little extra peace of mind.
And the reason that you would want to do that on the acrylic yarn is because it doesn't actually have any natural felting properties, which would make the stitches just stick there, which is what they've traditionally done with steeking. So that's why you would want to reinforce it as well. Let's see.
Melian says, using the 30-day sweater materials, will we be knitting in the round? That depends on if you're knitting a cardigan flat or if you're knitting pullover in the round, or you're knitting a cardigan that you knit in the round and then steek so that it is then open. So you can knit in the round or you can knit flat. It just depends on what you choose to do.
Either way you choose to knit the body, you will be knitting the sleeves in the round. So you might be knitting the whole body flat, but even if you're making a cardigan, your sleeves will obviously be in the round. So.
Someone says, I want to design a top-down raglan. Can I do this without the course or the book? You can, and there are resources out there that will help you with that. We just make it really simple for you to do so you don't have to go search. And we offer support to help you along the way as well. So that's why we recommend our resources, but there are other resources that you can use. It just wouldn't be eligible for the design competition.
I do not use social networking sites. Can I email photos of project in progress? Yes.
You can send them to questions@30daysweater.com.
Yeah, I didn't know which email to send it to. Questions, 30daysweater.com. Website for the favorites again. That's craftgossip.com, and it'll be in the knitting section, I believe, today.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it goes up today or tomorrow, but it should be up before the end of the week. And actually, we'll be having someone from Craft Gossip on the show on Friday to talk about tips for beginners who want to knit a sweater.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Or you can also go to Ravelry. That's the other site
Yes.
with lots of sweater patterns on it.
Tons of sweater patterns. Actually, there were 200 pages when I searched for sweater patterns.
So Melian says she's doing a hoodie. Is the hoodie knitted in the round? The hoodie is attached later, so it doesn't matter if you knit the sweater in the round or flat.
I would say that most hoodies are knit in the round.
Okay, well, if you guys have more questions, you can either leave them in the comments on this page if you're watching this after the fact, or you can email us at questions@30daysweater.com, and we'll be happy to respond to you as soon as we can. We've been getting a ton of emails, so we're doing our best to keep up with them. If you want to join in, you're sharing your progress on Ravelry, again, you can go to 30daysweater.com/Ravelry. If you don't have an account, you can create a free one and join in there. What else? Again, follow us on Twitter at 30daysweater, or Instagram, which is at 30daysweater. You can also hashtag any of your photos or posts on Facebook or those social media websites using 30daysweater, and we'll be able to see those as you post them. So thank you so much for joining us today. Remember, it's not too late to start the challenge. We're only 2 days in, so there's plenty of time to get started. So let your friends know at your local yarn stores. Tell them about the 30-Day Sweater Challenge. Tell them to sign up and get the the free sweater planning guide. And of course, there's always the 25% discount on the book or the course that you can get with your code that's in your sweater planning guide. So we will see you guys tomorrow.
10:30 a.m.
10:30 a.m. and we will have special guests, our friends Ron and Teresa Miskin from the Buffalo Wool Company, and we'll be talking about our progress and probably about casting on your sweaters. So we will see you guys tomorrow. Have a great day.